Neil Sinclair, we've been looking for you.
Took you long enough.
Every move Neil Sinclair made inside Met Police systems for nearly 5 years was being recorded. He is seconds away from finding out that IOPC investigators watched every single search.
The $3.5 million you laundered through UK accounts, the $1.5 million you moved to Dubai, and the intelligence you fed the crime group from Met databases since 2016.
4 years.
The records told the whole story. Audit logs, login timestamps, search strings tapped into a Metropolitan Police intelligence terminal by an officer ID that should never have been on those files. Over 5 years, that single ID kept surfacing where it had no business being, querying names that belonged to no investigation he was assigned to, opening flags on suspects he had never been tasked with. Lay those queries against the movements of a Dubai-directed organized crime group, and the two patterns matched name for name, date for date. 3 counts of misconduct in public office, 2 counts under the Proceeds of Crime Act, $5 million in criminal proceeds, 9 years in prison. The man behind that officer ID had spent 30 years inside British policing. Before we go any further, what would you do if you found out the person investigating organized crime in your city was actually working for them? Drop your answer below and subscribe if you haven't yet. We cover the cases the mainstream press files on page 19 and forgets about by Tuesday. Neil Sinclair was born in 1963 on the southeastern edge of London, in one of those tight terrace streets where the postman still knew everyone's first name, and the corner shop kept a tab for the families he trusted. His father worked the docks before the docks went. His mother kept the house and took in dressmaking on the side. There was no money for extras and no expectation of any. The Sinclairs were ordinary people, the kind of people, his old neighbors would later say, who taught their children that you did things properly and you did them honestly, and you didn't ask twice. He finished a comprehensive school with results that were respectable rather than remarkable, did a year on a Saturday lad's job at a builder's merchant's in Lewisham, and put in his application to the Metropolitan Police at 19. His personal reference described him as quiet, reliable, and physically fit, with what one form called a strong civic instinct. He passed the entry assessments at the second attempt. By the spring of 1984, he was at Hendon. The Hendon intake of that year remembered him as a serious recruit who kept his head down and put the work in. He was not loud in the bar after parade, not the first to crack a joke in the canteen, not one of the cadets the instructors marked out for the fast track. He was the steady one, the one who copied his notes neatly, who learned the wording of cautions verbatim, who took the radio procedure papers home at the weekend when most of the others were sleeping it off. He came out near the middle of the class. He took up his first posting in southeast London at the back end of 1984, in uniform, working response cars on the kind of estates where the calls came in faster than they could be cleared. For the first decade of his career, Sinclair was simply a working copper. He learned the geography of every council block on his patch. He learned the names of the families that were going to give him trouble in 5 years' time. He learned which corner shops sold rolling tobacco to 14-year-olds and which pubs would still serve a fight at last orders. He took his sergeant's exam in 1991 and passed it on the first attempt, which surprised nobody more than him, and was promoted in 1992 to a uniform sergeant role across the river. In 1995, he moved across to Essex Police on a transfer, then back into the Met as a detective in CID 2 years later. Detective work suited him. The pace was different. The cases were longer. The intelligence work, the part of policing that lives in folders rather than handcuffs, gave him something to chew on that the response cars never had. His annual reviews from this period are tidy and unremarkable, detail-oriented, patient with witnesses, steady under pressure, strong investigative instincts, and a methodical approach to file building. There is no flag in any of them, no early warning, no concerned supervisor making a quiet note. In 1996, he met the woman who would become his wife at a barbecue in Romford, thrown by another officer. They married 18 months later in a small registry office ceremony, followed by a meal in a function room above a pub. 2 children followed, a boy in 1999 and a girl in 2002. The family settled in a semi-detached 3-bed in a quiet Essex village an hour out of central London. Sinclair commuted in by train most days, sometimes by car when he was working late, and the neighbors saw him in the front garden at the weekends in cargo shorts and a faded England rugby shirt, pushing a petrol mower across a lawn he kept obsessively level. He coached his son's under-11s at the village football club on Sundays from 2007 toward. He stood on the touchline in the rain with a thermos of tea, shouting tactics that the children only half understood, and the other parents thought of him as the dependable one. The dad who turned up early to put the nets up and stayed late to take them down. He took his coaching badges through the county FA. He drove the team minibus to away fixtures in Chelmsford and Colchester. None of this was performance. He genuinely liked the work. It was, those parents later told reporters, almost impossible to square with the man whose name eventually came out of Southwark Crown Court. In the early 2010s, his career began to slow in the way most careers in any organization slow. He was no longer being promoted. He was not being moved to the high-profile squads. The work was steady but quiet. Intelligence handling, source liaison, the routine grind of CID file building. Around him, the men he had trained with at Hendon were either climbing into senior ranks or already retired on a constable's pension and behind the wheel of a courier van. He told colleagues he was tired. He told the family he was thinking about packing it in. In 2017, after 33 years on the warrant card, he submitted his retirement papers and walked out of the Met for the first time. That could have been the end of the story. A long service pension, a quiet retirement in Essex, the touchline on a Sunday and a holiday somewhere warm once a year. It wasn't. In January 2019, he came back. The Met was running short of experienced hands in certain support roles, and Sinclair applied for a police staff position. A civilian job, not a warranted one, but a job that still gave him a Met email address, a Met building pass, and login credentials to the same intelligence systems he had used as a serving officer. To his line manager, it looked like a sensible rehire, a known quantity, a safe pair of hands. It was the door he had been waiting for. To understand what Neil Sinclair did, you have to understand what a Metropolitan Police intelligence system is for and what it isn't. The Met holds some of the most sensitive operational data in British policing. Names of persons of interest, surveillance flags, address histories, vehicle markers, intelligence reports from informants, live notes on which crime groups are being looked at by which units, which financial accounts are under restraint, which suspects are about to have their doors taken in by a dawn warrant. A senior detective with the right credentials can move through that data with a search bar and a few keystrokes. The rule is simple. Every search has to have a legitimate operational purpose. You are not allowed to look at anything you are not assigned to. The systems know who you are when you log in. Every query is recorded. Every screen is logged. Every export of data leaves a footprint. The audit trail is the spine of the whole arrangement. The reason the Met can give officers and staff that much access in the first place is that the systems are designed on the assumption that misuse will eventually show up in the logs. in theory. In practice, the audit trail only catches you if someone goes looking. The volume of legitimate queries across the Met every day is enormous. A single officer running searches on dozens of names in a working week is unremarkable. A staff member with 30 years of policing experience, working in a support role with broad access, can move through those systems for years without anyone above them asking why a particular name was queried on a particular Tuesday morning. The supervision is exception-based. The default position is trust. For an organized crime group, that gap is gold. A live source inside the Met is not just information. It is a kind of insurance policy. It tells you whose phones are being looked at, whose accounts are about to be frozen, whose name has just come across a financial intelligence desk, which addresses are about to be visited. It tells you when to move money and when to keep it still. It tells you which courier to use and which to drop. It tells you, in the most useful sense possible, what the police are about to do before they do it. Neil Sinclair sat inside that gap for 5 years. The first confirmed unlawful access on the Met's audit logs dates to February 2016. Sinclair was, at that point, still a serving officer. He had been in the force for 32 years. He was 18 months from retirement. The query, when investigators later traced it, was a name search on an individual with no connection to any case he was assigned to. A name that, in a parallel intelligence file held elsewhere in the building, was already flagged as a person of interest to a long-running organized crime investigation directed at a group operating between London, Birmingham, and Dubai. He ran the search at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning. He stayed in the record for less than 2 minutes. He did not export anything. He simply read it. That search was the beginning. Over the next 5 years, across his last 18 months as a warranted officer, his 18-month retirement, and his return as police staff from January 2019 onward, Sinclair would log into Met intelligence systems and run searches on people he had no operational reason to look at. The names mapped with eerie consistency onto a small circle of associates of a Dubai-based principal at the head of an organized crime group. Each search aligned with something the group was about to do or had just done. Each query was, in effect, a warning system running in reverse. Not the police warning each other about the criminals, but the criminals being warned through him about the police. The arrangement was not, by any normal definition of the word, a one-off. It was a job. Sinclair was being paid to be inside the Met, not paid through a payroll, paid through the second part of his role, which was the money laundering work. This is where the case stops being a clean misconduct case and becomes something bigger. Sinclair did not only sell what was in his head and on his screen, he moved the money. From February 2016 through March 2021, under instruction from a Dubai-based offender at the head of the group, he became a node in the laundering network, a logistical hand inside the United Kingdom who could coordinate between handlers, account holders, and couriers, and who had the additional, almost surreal advantage of being able to check the Met's own systems for signs that the operation was being looked at. The pattern of the laundering was the standard architecture of any sophisticated UK to Gulf cash-out operation, with a particular tilt toward physical export. Cash was collected in the United Kingdom in volumes that, individually, would not necessarily trigger the most aggressive reporting thresholds, but that in aggregate told their own story. It was consolidated at points across London and the Midlands. It was bundled, counted, and prepared for movement. Co-defendants supplied the muscle and the accounts. Idris Tasab, 25, of Hilderstone Road in Birmingham, was one of those named in the eventual charge sheets. A man who would plead guilty in December 2024 at Birmingham Crown Court to concealing, converting, and transferring criminal property, and who would draw 7 years and 3 months in his own right. There were others. None of them, the eventual court summary would note, were police officers. The only one with a warrant card on his history was the man at the top of the inside line. Over the 5-year period of the operation, more than £1.5 million in physical cash was moved from the United Kingdom to the United Arab Emirates. That is not a wire. That is cash. Notes, bound, packed, transported. A further £3.5 million and more was layered through United Kingdom accounts and intermediaries, with Sinclair coordinating the relays. Taken together, the criminal proceeds passing through the operation he sat inside reached approximately £5 million. His lifestyle did not change dramatically. He did not buy a yacht. He did not buy a villa. The Essex Semi was still the Essex Semi. The lawnmower still came out at the weekend. But there were small things, in retrospect, that the family and the neighbors would notice without quite naming. A kitchen refit that seemed slightly more expensive than the household could comfortably absorb. A string of long-haul holidays that involved Gulf airports. An upgrade to a newer car on the drive that he explained away as a deal he had got through someone at work. Nothing screamed. Everything whispered. What let the operation run for so long was the same thing that had let his career as an officer run for so long. He was not flashy. He did not draw attention. He did the job in front of him and clocked off at the right time. To a supervisor walking past his workstation, he was a long-service police staff member doing the work he had been hired to do. The work he was actually doing, on the same screen, in the same windows of the same working day, was invisible unless someone went looking at the logs with a very particular question in their head. In September 2020, someone did. The first thread came from inside policing itself. In September 2020, the Metropolitan Police's own counter-corruption command received information about Neil Sinclair. The exact source has never been made public. What is on the record is the sequence that followed. The Met did not handle the investigation itself. Within the rules that govern serious matters of officer conduct, where independence becomes important, the matter was referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC, the statutory body that oversees the most serious complaints and conduct matters in policing in England and Wales. The IOPC took the referral and directed the investigation from that point onward. A Met counter-corruption tip, an IOPC referral, an IOPC-directed inquiry. That was the chain. It is the chain that exists precisely so that nobody inside the Met can be accused of investigating their own. The case against Sinclair was going to be built by people whose job description started with the words, independent of the force. We're heading into the investigation now. If you want to know exactly how the system handled this, exactly how an inside job in the Met got pulled apart, subscribe and hit the bell. We break down every step. The trigger on the record is restrained. Information received. The Met has not said whether it was a colleague, a source, a parallel investigation that threw up his name, or financial intelligence picked up overseas that fed back. What is clear is that the people running the early stages of the inquiry knew where to look. Counter-corruption work is rarely a fishing expedition. It is targeted from the first day, because by the time you have enough cause to start, you usually already have a strong sense of what you expect to find. For Sinclair, that September 2020 referral was the moment the audit trail stopped being theoretical and became evidence. From that point onward, every login he had ever made on a Met system was sitting in a queue to be reconstructed, search by search, by people who did not work for the Met. He did not know. Through the autumn of 2020 and the winter into 2021, he carried on. He went into work. He logged into his terminal. He ran more queries. He coordinated more relays. He moved more money. Right through to March 2021, the audit logs would later show, he kept doing the job. The IOPC-directed investigators were watching the same system he was using, in something close to real time, and the gap between what he thought he was getting away with and what was already being captured was widening every day. The reconstruction had 3 layers. The first layer was the system itself. Investigators pulled Sinclair's audit history across the period in question. Every login, every search string, every record opened, every screen viewed. They had timestamps. They had terminal IDs. They had session lengths. They had a complete map of what the man inside the Met had been looking at, hour by hour, across 5 years. From that map, they isolated the queries that had no business being there. A Met staff member with broad access is going to look at a great many things in a working week, and most of those will be perfectly explicable. Investigators stripped out everything Sinclair had a legitimate reason to query, anything that aligned with the workflows of his actual role, anything connected to the cases his colleagues were running through him. What was left was a residue, a core of searches that mapped to nothing inside the Met, but mapped to something outside it. The second layer was the gang. Working in parallel, financial crime investigators were already building a picture of the Dubai-directed organized crime group whose money was moving through the United Kingdom. They had names, they had account holders, they had courier movements, they had identified the principal in Dubai, they had identified a circle of UK-side handlers, including the man in Birmingham who would later plead at Birmingham Crown Court. They had cash consolidations, UAE export routes, and the layering of more than £3.5 million through domestic accounts. The third layer was the overlay. When they laid Sinclair's residue of unexplained Met searches against the gang's circle of interest, the names whose accounts and movements the group cared about, the 2 patterns aligned. Name for name. Date for date. Searches on a particular individual sat days, sometimes hours, before that individual moved money or changed an address. Searches on another sat alongside a specific period when an enforcement step against that person was being internally considered. The matches were not occasional, they were systematic. The IOPC's investigators did not stop at the system trail. They reconstructed the financial side in the same forensic detail. They mapped the cash consolidations he had helped coordinate. They identified the routes by which £1.5 million and more in physical cash had been moved from the United Kingdom to the United Arab Emirates, and the relays through which £3.5 million and more had been layered domestically. They identified his role as the policing insider sitting on top of the network, the man who could give the rest of them an early look at the police picture, and who in turn could place himself between Dubai and the United Kingdom side handlers as a coordinator on the laundering itself. Alongside Sinclair, 5 other men and 1 woman would eventually be brought into the same proceedings. None of them were police officers. They were variously charged with money laundering and related offenses. Some pleaded earlier in the chain. The Birmingham co-defendant pleaded in December 2024 and was sentenced separately. The case file that the prosecutors built for trial was, in the end, large enough and clean enough that Sinclair's own defense team had nowhere to take him. The smoking gun, when the case was eventually summarized in court, was the audit logs, his logins, his searches, his disclosures. The same officer ID kept appearing where it should not, on records that had no connection to any case he was assigned to. The Met's own systems, designed to catch this exact kind of misuse if anyone ever went looking, had been quietly writing his confession the entire time he was using them. 5 years of unexplained searches stitched neatly onto 5 years of organized laundering. The pattern, once you laid one against the other, was not deniable. In October 2021, Neil Sinclair was dismissed from the Metropolitan Police. By that point, the criminal investigation had already passed the point of no return. The confrontation, when it came, was not in a corridor. It was in an interview room. He was brought in for interview under caution by IOPC-directed investigators with a solicitor at his side. He had been given disclosure. He had seen the spine of what they had on him, the audit pulls, the overlap with the gang's circle of interest, the financial maps, the names of co-defendants who were already cooperating. He sat at the table in a gray jumper and a check shirt, hands folded, and listened. Lead investigator. Mr. Sinclair, you understand why you're here. Sinclair. I do. Lead investigator. We're going to take you through a series of searches on Met intelligence systems over a 5-year period starting February 2016. Searches made under your officer ID and later your police staff credentials. We'll be asking you to account for each one. Sinclair. I'd like to take advice with my solicitor before we go any further. They paused. The solicitor leaned in. They talked. The interview resumed. Lead investigator. Can you explain why, on the 11th of February 2016, at 11:14 a.m., you ran a search on this individual? You had no operational reason to look at him. Sinclair. No comment. Lead investigator. Can you explain why, on the following Tuesday, you ran searches on 3 further individuals whose names appear nowhere in your assigned caseload, but who appear in a parallel intelligence file as associates of an organized crime group operating out of Dubai? Sinclair. No comment. Lead investigator. Can you explain the movement of approximately £1.5 million in cash from the United Kingdom to the United Arab Emirates during the same period? Sinclair. No comment. He gave no comment to most of what they asked him. The interview tapes ran on. The investigators, who had been doing this work for a long time, were not surprised. A career detective in an interview room knows exactly what the value of a no comment is and exactly what its limits are. He sat there and absorbed it. When it was over, he was bailed pending charge, and he went home to Essex, where his wife was waiting at a kitchen table that had, until that month, belonged to a life that no longer existed. The charges came in due course. 3 counts of misconduct in public office, capturing the abuse of his policing role and the years of unlawful access and disclosure. 2 counts of entering into an arrangement to facilitate the acquisition, retention, use, or control of criminal property under Section 328 of the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, capturing the hands-on laundering work. 5 counts in total. A career on the right side of the badge, summarized on a single charge sheet. For a long stretch of the case, the question was whether it would go to trial. Sinclair had pleaded not guilty at first. He was placed in the dock alongside the 5 other men and the woman who had been brought into the same proceedings. They were variously charged with money laundering and related offenses. The trial bundle ran to thousands of pages. The Crown's case rested on the system trail, the financial reconstruction, and the testimony of investigators who had built the overlay between the two. In June 2025, before the case went the distance, Neil Sinclair pleaded guilty to all 5 counts. There is a particular quality to a late guilty plea in a case of this size. It is not the relief of a man finally telling the truth. It is the cold-eyed calculation of a man who has read the file and worked out, with the methodical patience of a long-service detective, that there is no version of the facts under which he walks out of court. The audit trail was not going to come apart on cross-examination. The financial reconstruction was not going to fall over. The co-defendants who had pleaded earlier were not going to be unpicked. He had spent enough of his career on the right side of cases, just like his own, to know what the file looked like. He was sentenced on Friday, the 31st of October 2025, at Southwark Crown Court. The sentencing hearing laid out the architecture of the case in open court. The prosecution walked the judge through the 5-year period of unlawful access. They walked through the search patterns and the overlay with the gang. They walked through the cash export to the United Arab Emirates and the layering of more than £3.5 million inside the United Kingdom. They named the principal in Dubai. They placed Sinclair at the top of the United Kingdom side network as the policing insider on whom the rest of it relied. The defense offered what mitigation it could: a long career of otherwise unblemished service, late guilty pleas, personal circumstances, health, the absence of a flamboyant lifestyle. The judge listened. The judge waited. The judge sentenced him to 9 years in prison. 9 years for a misconduct in public office case is heavy by historical standards. The judge's reasoning was clear in its framing. This was not a single moment of bad judgment by a tired officer. This was a sustained, salaried, second career working for organized crime, conducted from inside the very institution whose job it was to investigate them. The trust placed in him by the public, the judge said, by the Metropolitan Police, and by every colleague who had worked at the next desk over and assumed he was doing the same job they were, had been betrayed on an industrial scale. The sentence had to reflect that, and it had to mark the point at which insider corruption of this kind was treated by the courts as the serious organized crime it actually was. The IOPC, which had directed the investigation from the first referral in September 2020, framed the result in its own statement. It noted that the case had begun with information received inside policing itself. It noted that the audit trail had done the work the audit trail was designed to do. It noted that this was a result the public was entitled to see: a serving and then civilian member of the Metropolitan Police, convicted and imprisoned for selling the inside. He was led down from the dock to begin a 9-year sentence in his early 60s. The custodial element will take him deep into his 60s before any prospect of release on license. His police pension will not be unaffected by the proceedings that follow a conviction of this kind. His name has been added to the small, grim register of British police officers and police staff members convicted of structural corruption in the modern era. His co-defendants will serve out their own sentences in their own institutions. The Birmingham co-defendant, sentenced separately in December 2024 to 7 years and 3 months, was already inside before Sinclair's plea. The village in Essex, where he coached under-11s for more than a decade, absorbed the news in the way villages do. There were no public statements from the club. The neighbors, asked by reporters, mostly declined to comment. The kitchen with the slightly expensive refit, the lawn with its obsessively level edges, the football coach's jacket with the village crest. The man in the cargo shorts with the petrol mower at the weekend. None of it disappeared from the memory of the people who had known him. It simply had to be reread in light of the file. Somewhere in a Metropolitan Police server room, the audit logs that ended his career are still there. They will be there for as long as the institution exists. Every search, every login, every record opened, every screen viewed. The single officer ID kept appearing where it should not, on records that had no connection to any case he was assigned to. The pattern that ran for 5 years inside the very system the Met had trusted him to use. The pattern that the Met's own counter-corruption command and the Independent Office for Police Conduct, in the end, had walked into the open and laid in front of a judge at Southwark Crown Court. 9 years, 3 counts of misconduct in public office, 2 counts under the Proceeds of Crime Act. Approximately £5 million in criminal proceeds moved through the operation he sat inside. £1.5 million and more exported as cash to the United Arab Emirates. £3.5 million and more layered through United Kingdom accounts and intermediaries. A career on the right side of the badge, ended by the badge's own audit trail. The Met that hired him at 19, swore him in at 20, made him a sergeant at 28, made him a detective at 34, retired him at 54, took him back at 56, and dismissed him at 58, watched him sentenced at 62. The man who learned, over 3 decades, how British policing reads a system without leaving an obvious footprint, had finally been read by the system he had spent his career inside. This case was a slow rot dressed in a long career. But the next case on the right-hand side is the one where the rot moved faster, and the body count caught up with it before any audit trail could. Click it now.